Good morning, everybody, and welcome to episode 2412 of the Rental Training Club. I hope and trust you are finding the information we share in the training club useful. I think, as you've probably figured out, it's different from our normal training. And when I say normal, that's normal in inverted commas, because what we try and do is the Rental Training Club is we try and add value by looking at the sort of information and current affairs, I suppose, current rental affairs that we don't generally get time to do, or we generally don't cover in the sort of the other training, the sort of public training. Because in the public training, we focus more on our processes. Now, we've done that already in the Rental Training Club. So those recordings are on your portal or on your academy site. And so we can't just go over the same things over and over and over again. So that's why we try. Hi, Pasi, how are you? I hope and trust you guys are all well and safe in the Eastern Cape. So what we're going to look at today, there's been three reports out, or three main reports come out. And they seem to back one another up on a lot of the information. So I thought what we'd do is we delve into those reports, and it's actually quite interesting. I used to go through these reports when I was still working in a rental agency. But I think what I used to do at that point in time was just really glance over everything. Hi, Trevor. Just glance over everything. And it's interesting that when you're preparing for training, you have to think to yourself, now, what difference does this make to people's lives? How can people use this information? So we're going to be having a look at three reports today, or we're going to be looking at snippets out of three reports. Let's put it this way. The first one is a tenant survey report that TPN did, where they surveyed a number of tenants. And I think there's a few interesting things there. Possibly things that we not necessarily new information, although there is a little bit of that. And then we're going to be looking at the most recent TPN vacancy survey and the pay prop rental index. What I do want to say up front, though, is that what we have to realize is that reports by their very nature are always historical. So, for example, the most recent data, everybody works in quarters when they do reports. So the most recent data is from quarter one. Which is what we're going to be looking at today. And so that's January, February, March of this year. Quarter two report will probably be out. No, they take a while to get these reports out, so it'll probably be a month or two. So whatever the report says, the important thing is we need to realize that this is slightly in the past. Things might have moved on, so this might not be our current reality. But there are often trends that we need to take note of. I think the other important thing that we need to realize is that these are the reports that are used in newspaper articles which have been going out over the last few weeks. So this is the information our landlords are probably getting and are probably reading and are probably thinking is the current reality. So from that perspective, I think we also need to be aware of what the news is saying. What the latest stats are out there, because stats carry a certain amount of weight. So let's delve into this. Morning, Lorenda. I hope and trust everybody's well. I'm not sure where you guys are, but I have an idea that you might be somewhere where there's been a few problems. When I say problems, I mean in terms of rain. Anyhow, so let's get on. So the very first one is the TPN tenant survey report. And I found this report semi-interesting. There's a few interesting things in there, and one or two, I think, little warnings for us as we move forward. The reality is, in our market, we know our market is very much a supply and demand driven market. In other words, how many rental properties are available, how many people are looking to rent. So when we're talking about the supply, we're talking about how many rental properties are available, and that will differ from area to area, obviously. And then, of course, how much demand is there? How many people are looking to rent? And it has to do with the balance of that. And it seems to be as if that balance is changing at the moment. I think that's one of the key takeaways. So what is this TPN tenant survey report all about? So TPN surveyed 170,000 tenants. They sent out, and obviously the tenants on their database. The results were compiled from 19,000 responses that were received. And this makes this the largest, really the largest and the most comprehensive and the most representative information that we have at this point in time of what the situation is from the mouths of the tenant. Now, I realized yesterday when I was doing this, I'm talking about tenants because obviously these were tenants that were surveyed. So I'm going to be talking about tenants and landlords a lot this morning because that's where the information becomes useful for us. However, I think you'll notice that a lot of the findings are general people situations within the country. Okay, so it's not only things that affect tenants, but from our perspective, it's important for us to know how things are changing and how it possibly could alter the behavior and that we are experiencing from the people who rent from us. Let's call it that. Because when you say tenants, it sort of sounds like, yeah, it just doesn't sound nice. So one of the very first questions was, okay, why do people rent? And you can see here, there's one very, very, very standout reason that people rent is they say they can't afford to buy a property. Then the second highest reason is flexibility to move. And then renting is cheaper than buying. I'm only going to focus on the main ones. Interestingly, there's an age distribution here. So if we look at, I can't afford to buy a property, the reasons that were given is the high interest rates, inflation, and restricted employment opportunities. In other words, a large portion of unemployment. So that's why people can't afford to buy a property. The other very interesting thing is that Gen Z, in other words, our younger clients, our younger tenant clients, are more focused on flexibility. So when they say they want the flexibility to move, it's almost like the younger generation, or the Gen Z as they're called, I almost want to say commitment phobic. They want to have that flexibility. And this probably has to do with where they're at in their lives, point number one, but it also probably has to do with the fact that the sort of work that they do is often remote. And I know I'm making a generalization here. And so moving doesn't affect their employment opportunities. So it's almost like the way the world has changed. And that probably goes with the fact of some other stuff that we'll see just now. Then the renting is cheaper than buying reason came mostly from people in the 30 to 39 age group. Now, in terms of the affordability, I think we all know, I think a lot of you do sales as well. We all know that the interest rates are very high. And we know that inflation, I mean, that's why I said this is a tenant survey, but I think we know this from experience. You go to the supermarket this week and you go to the supermarket next week, and you know prices have gone up. So that's an interesting point there. So when we look now at the Generation Z are more focused on flexibility, and they view renting as more affordable than owning a property. The millennial generation, this is your 30 to 39s, and I wish I could say I fall in any of these groups, but I don't. I predate them. They believe renting is cheaper, okay? And there's a few reasons they look at this, and this is interesting. High property prices, as well as, I mean, the high property prices and the interest rates, I think, go together here. The maintenance costs, and they also want the flexibility to move without the burden of selling. Now, you know, it's interesting that all the way from 18 years old to 39, people want the flexibility to move. And that sort of indicates to me that people are sort of not long-term oriented. Because I mean, this is quite a big age distribution. And we'll have a look at what the sort of leases tenants are wanting a little bit later on, or quite soon in the result here. And this all links together with that. And then interestingly, between 40 and 49, and they say they're renting because of poor credit records. But they also want the flexibility to move. Everybody seems to want the flexibility to move. And I think that's interesting because it's always sort of been accepted that in our business, we are looking for 12-month lease agreements. And, I do some training, for example, on the early termination. As you know, all tenants can terminate lease agreements at any point. No, not all tenants, sorry. Tenants who fall under the Consumer Protection Act, Section 14, can terminate on 20 business days' notice. And just over the last few months, I've noticed an increase in interest and an increase in bookings on that particular training. And some of the feedback I've had from that training is this is happening more and more. And maybe this is borne out by this flexibility situation that people want. People are more mobile. Why? It's probably something to do with remote work as well. I don't know because, they didn't go into that sort of detail. Then noteworthy trends are around the desire to avoid debt. They want to avoid debt, and the older respondents are more worried about political stability. Now, I think we must take this also within the context of when this was done. Remember, this was done in Q1, and we were leading up to elections. So that might have been why the political stability was an issue. But the younger generation are less concerned about political and financial risk. Now, another interesting question they ask people is, what sort of lease structure would you prefer? Now, remember, we've got the cost of debt, we've got the inflation, we've got all of those things, the flexibility to move all of those things coming out from the previous results. And this has obviously had an impact on this. You will see that the number one preferred lease structure, and this is this one, okay, is they want lower rental escalation, which I think makes obvious sense. I don't know how we can give that to them, okay, but lower rental escalation, no deposit requirements. Remember, people are under financial pressure. Getting the deposit together is difficult. Tenants are saying, I don't want deposit requirements. But a weird one that's come out here is willing to commit to longer fixed term, which is really, really weird, because if you think about the results we've just looked at, everybody wants the flexibility to move. But they're willing to commit to longer fixed term to get a trade-off of lower rental escalations and no deposit requirements. Now, of course, in terms of Consumer Protection Act Section 14, the maximum permitted fixed-term lease under the CPA is 24 months at the moment, unless we can show a demonstrable, we have to be able to demonstrate that there's a financial benefit to the tenant. So, for example, offering them, if they want to commit, let's say, somebody contacted me the other day about somebody wanting to commit for 3 years or 4 years. Personally, I'm not really in favor of that, because I think that's life changes, and I don't think people think about that. But it seems to be that people are willing to sign longer term contracts for lower rental escalation and lower deposit requirements, which is a big worry. Okay, because of course the deposit, and so we're going to be under pressure clearly from people wanting not to pay a big deposit, or wanting to pay off their deposit, or wanting to do that sort of thing. So it's possibly something that you've already been experiencing, because remember, this is historical. So we're going to be under that pressure. The one thing, though, is that the deposit, we have to remember, is the only security that the landlord holds that they can access, when something goes wrong as permitted under the Rental Housing Act. There's no other amount of money that does that for them. Now, there are, you would have seen the trends probably. They've probably been contacted by, like deposit insurance and that sort of thing. That might be something that becomes more popular because people are probably prepared to pay that, or seem to be prepared to pay that from the results here. But you'll see here that a large number want fixed long-term leases, low escalation, and no deposit. It's almost half, 37.8%. The reasons that they want this is they want to be able to manage their cash flow, which makes sense. A longer fixed term contract means that I know what I'm going to be paying next year and possibly even the year after. And they say they are willing to remain renters, but I question that, because to me there's a bit of a disconnect between a large proportion of people, and we've looked at the age groups when we're looking all the way from 18 to 39, a large proportion of people that want the flexibility to be able to move, but then for financial reasons they say we're willing to remain renters for longer. I'm not quite sure if this is actually the reason. I almost want to translate this, and you can tell me whether you agree or not. The reality is that when a tenant signs a long-term lease, they still have that out clause. Most of them have the out clause of the 20 business days notice. So is this that they are actually willing to remain renters for longer because they've just told us in the previous question that they want the flexibility to move? And of course, the Consumer Protection Act offers that to them, even if they do sign long-term leases. So is it that they actually want to remain renters for longer? Or is it the fact that they want a longer-term lease to be able to manage their cash flow, negotiate a lower rental escalation, and negotiate the deposit requirements? That's the question I have. I think the latter is probably more probable. Yes, they would have indicated. So this is my interpretation. And you're welcome to give your comments on that. I just think that this doesn't tally with the fact that everybody, all the way up to 39, wants the flexibility to move. It just doesn't make sense for me. The other interesting thing, now this does make sense to me, is that the number 2 preferred lease structure is a month-to-month lease. This part tallies totally with the fact that people want the need for flexibility. And the reasons they give you is that they want the need for flexibility, and they're worried about the economic, the social, and the political uncertainty. But once again, let's contextualize this in terms of this was pre-elections, and we're only getting the results post-elections. So this tallies totally the fact that people want month-to-month leases. So this might be something, ladies and gentlemen, that we find, and we just need to think about how we're going to deal with this. We may find that more people are saying, I do not want to commit to a long-term lease, because this is also, I mean, this is 32%. This is almost a third of the tenants that responded, okay? Almost a third of people say they prefer a month-to-month lease. Now, of course, from our perspective, we probably feel that the norm is that we sign a 12-month lease. But is that going to stay the norm? That's the one question that does come out of these facts, or out of these results. Is that going to stay the norm, or are we going to find more demand? Now, I just want to go back quickly to this previous one, because there's something I forgot to say here. Often people will ask for a longer lease term to be able to negotiate the rental. But remember that they may still have the right to early termination. And let me just take an example here. Let's say we are advertising and the landlord wants 10,000 Rand a month. And I always pick 10,000 because it's an easy number. Let's say the landlord wants 10,000 Rand a month. Okay? And the tenant comes and says, I will offer you 9,000, and I'm just using round numbers here, but I will sign for 3 or 4 years. Now, that is, let's go back to when you can sign a longer lease. You can sign a longer lease when there is a financial benefit to the tenant. A rental discount and maybe a lower escalation that they negotiate can be, or is it demonstrable? We have demonstrated they are saving money. That's why they are wanting to do the longer term lease. And because of that, we can sign the longer term lease because there is a financial benefit to the tenant. So you might want, they might sign a 3 or 4 year lease. I'm just taking a theoretical example. But, ladies and gentlemen, what we need to remember is it does not affect their right if they have it under the Consumer Protection Act to terminate early. But when we start looking at the early termination or cancellation penalty, okay, one of the amounts that the landlord can claim is any discounts that were offered to the tenant for, or the consumer, but the tenant in our case, for the benefit of signing that long-term lease. So let's say we're advertising at 10,000 Rand, the landlord agrees to the 9,000 that the tenants asked for the purposes of a 3 or 4 year lease, a longer lease than 24 months. In any case, it's important that we then document in that lease agreement that a discount was offered. The asking price was this, so both parties acknowledge this was the asking price. The landlord has offered the discount, let's say, of 1,000 Rand a month, because of the longer term lease, or for the benefit of getting a longer term lease. However, should the tenant cancel early, then of course the landlord is not getting the benefit for which he or she gave the discount. So then that discount, let's say that they cancel after 6 months and they've had a 1,000 Rand discount for 6 months. That discount, which was the benefit or the quid pro quo for signing the longer term lease, now is of no effect because they've only stayed there for 6 months. So the landlord would then be able to claim that discount as part of the early cancellation penalties. Discounts offered are one of the things that can be claimed if a person does not live up to the full lease term for which they negotiated the discount. Sorry, I forgot to mention that here. So make sure that we do document it. Make sure that we do document it. Sorry. So coming back to the second one. And this, as I say, tallies up totally with the flexibility, because people want a large proportion. So it's almost 2/3 of the things. And then, okay, then there's the rent to own option and those sorts of things that come in. Now, a few interesting things. What sort of property type, okay, are people looking for? Interestingly, and I suppose this does make logical sense when we probably feel this innately, but it's borne out by the results here, is that the demand for the sectional title flats, the townhouses and the clusters, in other words, a more secure environment, really, where there's other people around, is predominantly women are more likely to select that. Interestingly enough, men prefer freestanding houses followed by a cluster in a complex and are less inclined to sectional title flats or townhouses. Now, I don't know if this is the wish list or if this is the reality, but this is what they said in the survey. Now, and I think this is where it becomes interesting for us. I think this is where the value of this survey's information will start coming out. And a lot of it's going to be logical, but this is the sort of information we can share with our landlords. The most important factor for prospective tenants when deciding on a rental property is the rental price. We've been talking about inflation. We've been talking about cost of living. We've been talking about debt. We've been talking about all of those things, financial pressures. So it actually makes total sense, but this is important for us. We need our landlords to understand when you list a new property now, okay, this is the sort of information. And by the way, I made a list of the reports because I'll send them out to you after this. But this is the sort of information that you can use, factual information, to speak to your landlords, to explain to your landlords that what this means is that the market is incredibly price sensitive at the moment. Incredibly price sensitive because of the financial pressures on tenants, not only on tenants, on all of us. And we all know that. Of course, now this becomes an issue because there's financial pressures on landlords too. So they're going to want to put things up, but they have to understand that this is the number one. Almost half the people will look at rental price. And I think this is the logical one, okay? Number two, fantastic information for you to include, for example, in your, when you go out and when you look at a new property, think of this, the number two, or bear this in mind, put this on your checklist for when you view a new property. The quality of security is the number two. the number two thing factor that people consider when they're looking for a property. So when we go, two things here, we need to have this rental price, keep this information handy, okay? Put together some of this information in your current, when you do a market appraisal, we talk about the current market, this is the sort of information that can go in that current market section of your rental appraisal, so that we are preparing landlords for this information, okay? But the quality of security, when you are viewing a property, take note of the security features, because people are wanting this. The number two thing is the security features. Also, don't be scared to say to landlords, in the most recent tenant survey of 2024, it has been shown that security is the number two factor that people consider when looking to rent your property. Maybe we need to look at blah, 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 depending on the property, okay? Because that would make your property more desirous in the market, easier to rent out. So you see how these facts can play into the way we speak to landlords and the way that we help them rent their property out. This is a very confusing graph, but don't worry. It looks pretty, okay? So you might want to include it, but this is simply so. Price is the number one most important feature. Just focus on this side. Security, number two. Pet friendly. Pet friendly, number three. Now, that's always a bit of a problem, because there's certain properties that just simply aren't. And then after that, they look at the space and the property size and the distance to work. So these are the sort of screenshots that you can include in your market information, possibly. You can even do a newsletter based on the information we're sharing today. Now, tenant aspirations. Tenant aspirations. Where do they want to be in 5 years' time is more or less the way I'll translate this. Interestingly enough, 19%, 1/5 of the tenants we're dealing with in general, are looking to buy within a year, okay? I'm assuming interest rates must come down, but from all the stats, interest rates won't be coming down soon, or the expectation is. Let me rather put it this way. The expectation is. But here's a pool of potential future buyers, and I don't know if we ever thought about this. I don't know if we all know. We've probably thought about it, sorry. Sometimes when I talk while I'm sitting on my bum, my brain doesn't really engage. So, about 1/5, 20%, are looking at buying a property for a year from now. These 30% are looking at buying a property within 2 years from now. So almost a half of the people that we are placing in rental properties have an aspiration to own. And just now, I went over it rather quickly, but the rent to own option, that I think was number 3 in terms of preference of leases. The first one was the fixed term, the lower escalation, and the no deposit. Number 2 was the month-to-month leases, and number 3 was the rent to own. This makes sense now. People do, or not yet, but in the next 2 years, half of the people we'll deal with. Are we including those people, for example, in the properties for sale? Now, tenants' biggest challenges. What do you think that tenants say is the biggest problems that they deal with when they are looking to rent, and not when they're looking to rent a property, when they are renting a property? The biggest issues that they have as renters, as tenants. And the hint there is it's not paying the rent. That's not the number one issue. Non-attendance of repairs and maintenance. You know from experience that a lot of people complain about these things. And nobody's getting back to me, nobody's doing this. And I know that we're sandwiched in the middle. Because not only our tenants are under financial constraints. Remember, our landlords are also normal people. So they're also under financial constraints. And this is where these things sort of, I almost want to say the rubber hits the road, but it's not really the rubber hits the road. It's where accidents happen. Where there's competing interests. We've got landlords that need money because everything's going up, the interest rates are up, etc., etc. So they're cutting back on things of repairs. And so Non-attendance of repairs and maintenance is the biggest issue. So that's a discussion that we need to have with our landlords, I think, too, when we sign up. We need to explain to them what their obligations are. And to be honest, I think we actually need to, and I discussed this in, I think it was last month or the month before when we looked at mandates, getting them to commit to certain turnaround times for approving repairs and maintenance, because it came out there too. Okay, it's something that we get a lot of. Landlords do not respond quickly. So the number one is the non-attendance of repairs and maintenance. Number two is paying the rent on time. Makes total sense in the financial climate. Number three, access to parking and availability of parking. And this, I think, this links more towards the clusters, the complexes, those things. Most people have more than one car. A lot of places only offer car parking or secure car parking. Number four, look at number four. Lacking control of utility costs. It comes out here that people want prepaid. People want prepaid. They want to know where they're at. They want to be able to control their utility costs. And so this is another factor that we can talk to about new landlords as we're signing them up or as we're busy developing this relationship. Then understandably, funding security deposits. Look here in the top 10, and I think we know this from experience, non-payment of levies, rates, and taxes by the landlord. I don't know how the rest of the country works, but in Cape Town, for example, even if you have a prepaid meter, I rent. So I go and I buy 500 rands worth of electricity. In a good month, we buy 500 at a time. Now, so I go and I buy 500, and I get 500 rands worth of credits, which are even less today than they were last month. But that's just the reality of life. However, if the landlord is behind in rates and taxes in the city of Cape Town, they make a deduction from that 500. So I might go and buy 500 and only get 200 rands worth of credits because 300 is gone, because the city just assumes it's the landlord there, and the city evidently has the right to do this. Not sure how that happens in other parts of the country, but you can see it's one of the top 10, one of the top 10. Okay, so this is just the pretty picture, which is all over the place. But non-attendance of maintenance, repairs, paying the rent, and lack of control. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope that gives us some context, and I hope you found that information useful. So that was what tenants are saying. Now we're going to have a look at what the factual information says. Now, there were two reports out. So I've pulled snippets out of both of them because there's a lot of correspondence. The one is the TPN vacancy survey. So that focuses more on the vacancy side. And the other one is the pay prop rental index that came out recently. And you'll see lots of news articles. That's why I thought it's important that we also look at it. The first question is, what has happened to vacancy rates? And super positive for us is vacancy rates have reached their lowest level since 2016. So there are less vacancies now than what there have been over the last 8 years. From our perspective, that's good. It means we've got less properties that are not paying us to look after them every month. Okay? These are, however, the national figures. I'm not going to go through the provincial figures simply because we have people from many provinces and I want to focus on the most important things. But I'll send this out to you and you'll be able to see. Interest rates. More households are renting as home ownership continues to decline. Okay, so this is why vacancies are at their lowest levels. The reasons that the experts say that. Now, this tallies with our tenant report. Okay, cost of debt, debt phobia, if you want to call it that. Interest rates are at a 15-year high, and they continue to place indebted consumers under pressure. And it's likely to continue. So we're likely to continue to have higher demand for rental properties because of the fact that home ownership has become unaffordable for people. Looking at the prospects from what's going to happen, it seems to be that both reports indicate, and if I recall correctly, at least one of them indicate, that the expectation is that those interest rates will not be dropping. There was an expectation it would go lower this year. At the moment, the feeling is that they won't, or at least the feeling was that 3 months ago. The other thing that comes out, and I must admit, it's not something that I probably even think of, is continued high unemployment. The fact that a lot of people are still looking for jobs. Okay, so if they don't have the income, then of course they have a problem with a high unemployment, which means that they can't afford to buy a property, which means that they have to go for the option of renting. Probably in the lower, I'm assuming, I'm just making an assumption here, in the lower rental bracket. So this is the percentage of households renting versus ownership. Okay, and you will see these are rented properties, and you'll see that they've just gone up. And this is, okay, don't worry about these. These are occupied rent-free properties. And these are the blue ones are the owned properties. So you'll see that the home ownership levels, and this is from Stats SA, but well, it's in the report though. So the home ownership levels have generally come down over the last few years, where the rentals have gone up, because the bottom line is there's still people, isn't there? And they still have to live somewhere. So that's an interesting thing. So that's why we've had a turn in terms of the number of renters. So what does this mean for us? There's higher demand than what is available in the rental market. Okay, the demand outweighs the supply. And it's a fancy way of saying there's more people want to rent, but the stock hasn't increased necessarily. There's an optimistic sentiment, low vacancies. Now, low vacancies, more demand, normally results in positive rental growth, which normally means an increase in rentals. That is the norm. When there's more demand, rents go up. But, ladies and gentlemen, we need to take into account here that there are serious constraints on household budgets. Serious constraints on household budgets. And this can result in an increase in the number of tenants defaulting on their rental. This is from the TPN survey, okay? So we need to make sure that our vetting and our breach processes are rigorous and applied consistently. Because the chances, not because people are bad people, and I think that's something we've got to clarify. It's not that they're bad people. It's that there are pressures, financial pressures from outside that we sort of have no control over. That means we are extra super cautious. And so because of that, we're under more financial pressure, which means that people could default. Now, if we have a look here, they've got this funny, confusing thing called Rental Market Strength Index. This is the TPN result, okay? And you will see the demand. Let's forget about the numbers, because they've got a funny formula they use to do this. But the demand has gone up. The supply has gone down. That's the important thing to show you. Now, that would normally mean, yippee, we can look forward to increased rental amounts. But we know from the tenant survey, this is where we pull all of this together, that there are huge financial pressures on not only the tenant survey, also just the statistics, okay, the interest rates and all those things. There are huge pressures financially on people. So, although this would normally indicate rent rises, there's a lot of pressure from a different angle on the rental increases, so we possibly are not going to see the rental increases that we would normally see under normal, in inverted commas, circumstances. Now, okay, so this was TPN. Now, going to PayProp. Okay, have a look here. The rental growth, in other words, the year-on-year increase. How does this year, okay? How does quarter one 2024 compared to quarter one 20, sorry, this is from 2020, but to quarter one compared to quarter one last year. Look what's happened. The rental amounts, the growth in rental, there's still a bit of growth, but they've dropped. They've dropped. In other words, rents are not going up as much as what they have. Look at the quarter-on-quarter results here. Okay? It was an upward trend last year. Okay, well, it sort of flattened off. Well, yeah, it flattened off at the end of last year. Now it started turning. So we haven't got rents coming down yet, but we know rents are under more pressure. The increases, the supply demand, the increases that we could expect from supply demand are being inhibited because of people's financial ability to pay, because of people's other financial responsibilities. Oh, sorry, now I don't know what has happened here. Let's just see if I can fix something quickly in the background. Somewhere. Okay. Let me just do that again. I don't know what was. No. Sorry, somehow something went wrong. I just want to get back to that slide. That I'm going to show you the information behind that slide. I just want to get back to it. Sorry about this. Okay, so I showed you that graph of where the rental growth is starting to chip off. Okay, smaller increases than what we would expect. This may be the start of a plateau, they say, and the paper stats indicate that the post-pandemic rental growth recovery is probably well and truly over. But the reasons here go back to everything the tenants have told us. Okay, these things all fit together. Probably tenant affordability. Tenants being under financial pressure is mentioned in both the TPN and the paper reports. We've got to bear that in mind. The paper report has got another warning in it. They call it a warning. Okay, so I'm just going to call it a warning because I'm just going with their words. Agency leaders, agency owners need to manage their finances carefully. And this was something I didn't even think about. And when it says agency owners, I think it actually means all of us. Why? Why? Because there's a growing gap between the rental growth and the inflation. So we would have seen that rental growth was about 3.something%. But we know that inflation is somewhere at the moment at around 6%. So what does that mean? Our income trails rental growth because we're a percentage of the rental. So now that income increase is coming down, but our expenses, the inflation side, so an agent's commission is falling further behind their costs. And then, of course, the high interest rates also suppress the rental housing market. So this is the standout here, is that the rental growth fell below compared to previous quarter. And that's just one of the interesting facts. But that's important. Our expenses continue to go up because we know food goes up, all sorts of things go up. The paper report arrears update. Just a reminder here from the TPN report that we looked at. One of the warnings they gave there, one of the important factors something I took note of was constrained household budgets can result in an increase in the number of tenants defaulting. Make sure that of it. Well, I'm saying make sure. The blue part is me. So let's have a look at the PayProps arrears update. The TPN didn't have this. Can you see that it's 78, 77, 74, 74, more or less stable? Now it started going up a little bit. And the concern is that this may be, what's going on now? This may be an indication that things are changing. if we also have a look here on the PayProp report arrears update, and remember, PayProp's got quite a big what would we call it, list of tenants on their books. We'll have a look here that this is the national versus the provincial. And in this one, the Free State arrears have come down. Limpopo, the arrears have come down. But every other, so Free State, Gauteng has gone up slightly, KwaZulu-Natal has gone up slightly, Northwest has gone up slightly. The only ones that have come down are 2 provinces. In all other provinces, the arrears have started to creep up. Nothing necessarily significant at this point. The Northwest is the biggest increase, but this is important for us to say, are we ready for this? We need to keep this under control, because one thing about arrears is, and I know this seems harsh, but we need to take action immediately so that we can resolve the problem while the problem is still small if it's resolvable. But I think we all know the financial pressures that everybody is under. Absolutely everybody. Why is this the case? Tenant spending on rent and debt repayments is down. You know, when you do your credit check and you start looking at their monthly commitments and that, even amongst high-risk tenants, the facts say that their spending on rent and debt repayments is down. People are commitment phobic. Rent is one of the highest things. All those factors that we looked at. So why are more of them? So they've become more economized on rental. Their debt repayments, a lot of people have tried to get rid of those because they've just become unaffordable. So why are people falling behind on their rent? Because when we look at the stats, when we look at those stats where it says, sorry, not the stats, the facts in a credit check, and it says this is their debt, this is their monthly commitment, we only look at contractual recurring expenses like car loans, mobile phone bills, housing loans, those sorts of things, or what you find on them. But the disposable income has gone a little bit higher because the debt commitments have come down. But the disposable income is the thing that covers most everyday expenses like food, transportation, and rent. And the prices we know have gone up. We know this. So although tenants have cut back on debt and rent, I think this is such a key thing. Because our landlords, this is the sort of information we need to sort of have in our heads when we speak to landlords when they are wanting unrealistic increases. You know that thing about all leases, not all leases, but a lot of people just put a 10% increase in a lease. Okay, for next year. We're not going to be getting those 10% anymore. Well, we haven't had them for ages, but some provinces have been like 8 point something, but it's taking a dip. So this is now the landlord education part, and this is the sort of information we need for that. So although tenants have cut back on debt and inflation, debt and rent, sorry, inflation is putting their disposable income under 10. So the reality is that not just tenants, we're all feeling it. I think we're all feeling the fall in debt to income ratio. So what's happened is the amount of debt that people have had has reduced. People have got rid of some of that, okay? Despite their persistently high indicators. So they're cutting unnecessary expenses and taking on new debts. They're cutting that. They're avoiding taking on new debts. But why? Because in the end, that money is going to food, fuel, rent, and other essentials. And according to the stats from PayProp, and you see how both of these reports are essentially telling us the same picture, just as in different aspects or looking from a different angle. Even after these measures, a growing number of tenants may not have enough disposable income left to cover their rapidly increasing costs. And one of the big costs there is the rental. So this is, and let's have a look, and this is the last slide we're going to be looking at today. It's clear that from the fall in rent to income ratios, that rent increases are not to blame for the increase in arrears. So if we have a look here, let me just figure this out. Okay, this was last year. This was last year. This was this year. Last year, let's look at high-risk tenants, for example. Last year, people's debt was costing them 53, just over half of their income. This has dropped now to 50. The 49 has dropped to 47, 44 to 43, the 36 just slightly, the minimum risk tenants, okay? So we can see that the debt to income level has come down. So people have costed, maybe they've stopped committing to debt, maybe they've got rid of some of their debt, etc. The rent to income level, you see, has also come down slightly. People are more cautious. The number one reason, the number one factor that people consider, the rent. Their disposable income has gone up, but we're seeing an increase in arrears. So it's showing that it's not because of disposable income, but that disposable income, the thing we call disposal, I hate the word, disposable income, okay? We don't dispose of it. It's stuff we need to live. That has to cover a whole lot of things, food, getting transport, petrol, all those things. And those things have gone up a lot more than what, I almost say what they're supposed to, but what incomes have gone up, of course. And the income part is the part they didn't look at there. Ladies and gentlemen, that essentially covers the information. Now, when I'm sitting and I'm going through this and I'm thinking to myself, some people are just not numbers people. Have I provided you with any? I suppose what I'm hoping is that we have a context. We now understand where things are. We understand that the clients that we are looking for to spend money with us, in other words, tenants, are super, super, super under pressure. I think we all know that I assume we're all a little bit more under pressure. Sorry, let me just stop the share. There we are. So I hope that's given you some thoughts of the sort of things we need to be preparing for. The sort of things we talk to landlords about. There's a few standouts for me if I just think about this off the top of my head. I need to talk to landlords about maintenance. Okay, this is a common issue. I need to get commitments from landlords about maintenance. When we go look at a rental property, okay, just a few takeaways here off the top of my head. When we go look at a rental property, remember that security is the number two thing. The number two thing that tenants are looking for. Bear that in mind. Prepare that we're going to be under more pressure for lower rental increases. It's clearly showing that tenants don't want to or can't afford to pay large deposits. There are things that we can look at there, like deposit insurance and that sort of stuff, those sorts of things. So bear those things in mind and make sure that when you do your rental appraisal for landlords, one takes this into account. I will be sending you all copies of the 3 reports, because then you might want to also delve into your particular province. I think I pre-prepared. Let me just have a look. Yeah. So if we have a look, actually, I forgot now. Let me just share again quickly. See if I can get this one too. Okay, I don't know what's going on. Sorry. My thingy is deciding it wants to be difficult. I'm just coming back to my Zoom. Apologies. But you'll see in there, I'm just going to get rid of that. I don't know why my system is a bit slow. Maybe it's the rain, maybe it's the wind, who knows. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's the information that I had to share with you. Nondumisos made a comment. It's clear that rental escalation should not be applied or should be minimal if we want to keep our tenants. I think, yes, I think that's something that landlords need to start preparing for. This is now obviously an ideal sort of reason to send out a landlord newsletter with the latest stats, with the emphasis on certain things. There's more pressure on rentals. And it's not just you saying this here, okay? It's not just you saying this. You've now got the backup of saying in the most recent surveys by, or in the most recent statistical reports from PayProp, and these are the following things. Please prepare that this might be happening. We're going to getting more pressure on rentals. Tenants have less disposable income because they're having to. I mean, look, the one thing we can't have a choice. We have to eat. We have to eat, otherwise we'd like finish. So it's those sorts of things. But remember, we're going to have this competing issue because now landlords are also. I know this is a tenant survey and tenant stats and all that sort of stuff, but we must admit it's a people thing. This is representative of people, I think. So you're right, Nondumi. So we need to, rental escalations will probably be under a lot more pressure to keep our tenants, okay? Now, the vacancy rates have gone down. The vacancy rates have gone down. But that's because of the fact that a lot less people, the people want this flexibility and all that stuff. That's another thing to bear in mind. If you start getting more requirements for month-to-month leases, is that something one should consider? You know, that this is when you're having, and this is where all these things come into. These are just sort of tools in your arsenal that I like to share, because when we start, let's say we start getting more requirements for a month-to-month lease because I want to be flexible, then we need to be able to pull out those stats and say, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord, I understand that this is not what we are accustomed to. Okay, this is not the normal, but this is the new normal, because here is the results from a tenant survey. And why do I say that? I say that because unfortunately, the reality is that people will listen to stats that are independent, in inverted commas. They will rather take note of those stats. So make sure that we sort of have this in our arsenal. Trevor says the stats are pretty much in line with sales and general business across the board. We hear similar issues from homeowners. Great. I'm glad, and this is not I've done stats before, and I don't do it every quarter when there's information out. But I thought this particular quarter, because we had the PayProp stats as well as the TPN stats that were clearly supporting one another. I thought it's important that we need to know that, so we can have those discussions and we can back up what we're saying when we're speaking to our landlords. So, ladies and gentlemen, I will send you those reports. I've also arranged. Trevor talks about that the tenants have in the region of 5% increase, and landlords generally understand and are informed. That's fantastic. That's fantastic. And so the reality is, and thanks for sharing that, Trevor. What you're saying to us is that reality is actually supporting this. Reality is supporting this, which is what I like to know, that it's actually happening. But once again, let's just bear in mind that that was the 3 months ago information. Now you might be experiencing something not totally different, but it might actually be a little bit worse in terms of pressure. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you find that information useful. I hope you find the things I've said. You know, when you're giving discounts or when a landlord is giving a discount, please remember, if they're giving a discount for a longer term contract, because we might come under pressure for that, then please make sure to note that in your special conditions, that the landlord is discounting the rent by this amount of money for consideration because of the consideration of a longer term contract offer. So this is the demonstrable financial benefit to the tenant, but should the tenant cancel early, this discount can be claimed out of the early cancellation penalty. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, that's what I had